Hey guys, welcome to the second episode of the Whatever History podcast. Today I'm going to talk about the Industrial Revolution in 3 different countries, China, Great Britain, and Russia, as well as how the Industrial Revolution affected the quality of life in these countries. For this episode, I'm mostly going to focus on the financial results of the revolution. I've given some background on the Chinese Industrial Revolution in my previous episode, so for this one, I'm just going to give the info on the British and Russian Industrial Revolutions. First of all, let's get the definition straight. According to Crash Course World History, love you John Green, the Industrial Revolution was an increase in production brought about by the use of machines and characterized by the use of new energy sources. So, it meant that people now made things way more efficiently. Britain is often considered to be the first country to go through an industrial revolution. The British Industrial Revolution started sometime around 1750, when John Kay invented the flying shuttle. This invention made textile production much more efficient, which increased the demand for cotton and yarn. This, in turn, led to the processes being mechanized by coal-powered machines. To provide the coal for all of these machines, Thomas Newcomen made a more efficient steam engine to take out water from the coal mines. More steam engines meant more fuel and more steam engines. Pretty neat. From that point, more and more industries began to get improved in this way. By the way, all of this info came from the 32nd episode of Crash Course World History. Be sure to check it out if you haven't already. It explains the Industrial Revolution in the world and specifically in Britain really well. Now, what about the Industrial Revolution in Russia? I'm mostly using Russian sources for this one. According to StudFiles, the Industrial Revolution in Russia began much later than in other European countries. Most sources agree that Russia's industrialization began at around the 1830s and 1850s, when Nikolai I was the emperor. Although modernization began at around this time, it was aggressively implemented only in the 1920s to 30s and 1950s to 60s, which was after the establishment of the USSR. Were there some good sides to that? Yup. Were there some bad sides? Definitely. Let's find out more. So, first, Britain. How did industrialization affect the quality of life there? It's complicated. The main source I used for this is called Pessimism Perpetuated, Real Wages and the Standard of Living in Britain During and After the Industrial Revolution. The title kind of gives away the conclusion of the article. It was written by Charles H. Feinstein in 1998. Feinstein completed his doctorate at Cambridge University and went on to become an almost celebrity among historians. His books, such as An Economic History of South Africa and British Economic Growth, 1856 to 1973, were very well received and had a significant impact on economic history. The article I chose, Pessimism Perpetuated, came from the Journal of Economic History, which is an academic journal with an incredibly bland name. I bet you already forgot it. Nevertheless, it is very respected as a source of information. The article sets out to reach a consensus on the controversy about the impact of early industrialization and capitalism on the standard of living of the British working class. That's precisely what we want. The document utilizes new estimates of nominal earnings and the cost of living in industrial Britain to calculate the standard of living of the average working class family. After analyzing the data, Feinstein finds that over the 75 years from 1778 to 1853, the increase in real weekly earnings, allowing for unemployment and short-time working, was less than 30%. He also adds that the quality of life could have increased even less because of additional factors, such as adulteration of food, an increase in the number of family members a worker had to support, poor housing, inadequate public health, as well as the decline in relief expenditure. When these factors are included in the calculations, Feinstein says, the standard of living shows an increase of only 10%. In his last paragraph, he concludes that most British workers and their families did not experience an actual deterioration in their standard of living during and after the Industrial Revolution, but neither did they enjoy the rapid progress which the super-optimists have discerned. For the majority of the working class, the historical reality was that they had to endure almost a century of hard toil with little or no advance from a low base before they really began to share in any of the benefits from the economic transformations they had helped to create. So, according to Feinstein, the majority of the population's quality of life neither increased nor decreased. Interesting. Overall, I find the source worthwhile. It's written by a respected and intelligent historian, includes data, and is very well written. The only limitation I could find is the time of the source. It was published in 1998, which means that the data might not have been the most accurate and could potentially be contradicted by recent discoveries. However, this is a historical paper, and history doesn't depend on current data as much. I would give this source an almost perfect 9.5 out of 10. Counterclaim time. Although some sources disagree with Feinstein, they're not as reputable as his article. For example, the 1932 Sadler Commission testimony of Mr. Matthew Crabtree shows how women and children worked for long hours in factories. In the statement, Crabtree says that he used to work 16 hours a day at a factory when he was 8. If he were ever late, he would be physically punished for it. This interview, as well as some others, led to the passage of the Act of 1833, which limited employment for women and children. In general, this source is pretty good. It's a primary source that details the experiences of a real person. However, it is just about the experience of a single person, which could not be used to represent the population of Great Britain as a whole. Therefore, this source has been denied. Next source. So how about the Industrial Revolution in China? Did it improve the quality of life or not? Overall, it's an almost definite yes. I'm going to reuse a source I used for the previous episode and some of the text describing it. If you don't want to listen to it, feel free to skip ahead. The source I'm reusing is a science article titled The Long-Term Impact of the Communist Revolution on Social Stratification in Contemporary China. It was published by Yu Xie and Chunyi Zhang in 2019. Yu Xie is a Chinese-American sociologist who studied at Peking University and Princeton University. He has published books on both America and China. Chunyi Zhang also studied at Peking University. The paper I chose reports findings from a systematic study of the long-term impact of the Communist Revolution on social stratification in today's China. It has a precise method and reaches a definite conclusion that the Chinese Communist Revolution fundamentally altered the pre-revolutionary social stratification order over the long term. The study showed that the revolution disrupted the cross-generational reproduction of the prevailing social stratification at the time of the revolution in promoting the social status of children of the red, poor peasant, and working classes, and disadvantaging those from privileged classes. So according to this source, the revolution had a positive effect and brought progress in the long term. The information in the paper is presented in a way that's easy to read, and since both of the authors have previous experience and excellent quality data, their conclusion is very well supported. I would give it an 8 out of 10. Counterclaim time. I'm also reusing the counterclaim source, firstly because I think it works well, and secondly because I'm lazy. It is a New York Times article written in 1983 by Richard Bernstein. He is still writing for New York Times, but now he mostly works on the Letter from America column. He still writes some articles about China, and he's been a foreign correspondent for both the Time magazine and the New York Times in Europe and Asia. He also wrote multiple books about China and the Communist Revolution. In this article, he argues that the revolution did not bring progress to the rural areas of China and instead harmed the people there. According to him, the Chinese countryside is dominated by surviving traditions, bride prices, rural superstitions, and ancestor worship, along with the plain hardships of rural life. However, this point is mostly supported just by Stephen W. Mosher's book Broken Earth, where Mr. Mosher describes his experience visiting China. The problem with this is that a single account of an individual's experience and some interviews alone could not provide a fair and accurate picture. Bernstein himself notes that Mr. Mosher's challenge to the conventional assumption that rural life in China has greatly improved since 1949 is not definitive, in that there is no systematic weighing of the factors that make up the quality of life. This seriously brings the validity and accuracy of Mosher's book into question. While Bernstein disregards these concerns, I will not do that. There are many reasons to believe that Mosher's book is at least biased and possibly even purposefully misleading. At Stanford University, where Mr. Mosher was a candidate for a PhD, launched an investigation, Stanford announced that Mr. Mosher had engaged in illegal and seriously unethical acts and terminated his candidacy. Overall, this article might give a different perspective, but the claims that it makes are not supported by evidence. So, this counterclaim has been denied. Next, source. Now here's the real kicker, the Industrial Revolution in Russia. The source I used for this one is a Russian paper by A.G. Volodin. The article is titled Civil Society Modernization in Russia, Origins and Contemporary Issues. That's quite a mouthful. It was posted to a website called The Civil Society in Russia, Scientific Online Library, which is an open-source online collection of papers and articles about the Russian government and, you guessed it, civil society. Alexei Gennadьевich Volodin, the author of this paper, has a doctor's degree in historical sciences and is the chief researcher at the Institute of World Economy and International Relations, a very famous research institute in Moscow, Russia. Overall, this guy has more than enough credentials. According to the paper, Volodin's purpose is to first of all outline the circumstances of Russia's modernization, and secondly, to give instructions for moving forward. I'm mostly interested in the first part, as well as the analysis for it. This paper doesn't have an overall conclusion that clearly states the effects of the Industrial Revolution, but some quotes can shed light on the author's view of the topic. One of the quotes says that the process of modernization brought outstanding personalities to the forefront of Russian history, who were clearly constrained by the conservatism of Russian society. This quote implies that one of the effects of modernization on Russia was an upheaval in societal classes and the ability of people from the lower classes, or those with unorthodox beliefs, to be heard. This is later supported by another quote. Accelerated societal processes pushed out the masses of people who lost support in the traditional institutional hierarchy from the pre-industrial classes. The rest of the article expands on this idea and reviews it from different perspectives, before agreeing that the main result of Russia's Industrial Revolution was the change in the social structure. Overall, this source was helpful, but not very well suited for my purposes. I personally found it very difficult to read and understand, since it didn't have a clear structure. Additionally, this article had other focuses that are not very useful for my point. I would give this source a 6.5 out of 10, because it works, but it's not very well suited to the purpose of my podcast. Counterclaim time. The counterclaim is the book Gender and Housing in Soviet Russia, Private Life in a Public Space by Lynn Atwood. The problem is I can't actually review this book because it's behind a paywall. So I'll just review the first page of a book review on this book. I can't even see the full book review because that's also behind a paywall. The book review says that the book talks about the dreadful housing conditions people experienced during the Soviet era. It gives information and some details about the truly horrible conditions people lived in. This information is, in fact, supported by other sources, such as Who Gets What, When, and How, Housing in the Soviet Union by Henry W. Morton. I can't check this source either because it's also behind a paywall. Both Henry Morton and Lynn Atwood are respected Sovietologists and have a substantial number of published works on the Soviet era. This book shows the harmful effects of modernization and the Industrial Revolution, which in Russian history are tightly connected to the Soviet Revolution. I would say that this source is actually pretty good and valid. Guess what? This counterclaim is accepted. It means that the Industrial Revolution in Russia had both good and bad effects. Conclusion time. Overall, the three primary sources I used for the three main industrial revolutions gave three very different results. We found that in Britain, the effects of the Industrial Revolution after 100 years were negligible, and did not substantially increase the quality of life. In China, however, the Industrial Revolution significantly improved the quality of life for people 3 generations later. Lastly, in Russia, the Industrial Revolution had both positive and negative effects. All in all, we found that the impact of the Industrial Revolution varies significantly from country to country. This episode turned out kind of longer than the previous one. Sorry about that. It also took a very long time to make, so if you liked it, tell your friends about it or something. I might make this an actual thing if anyone cares. The sources and the citations are in the description. I used music from Lish Groups for this episode. Anyways, I hope you guys had a good time listening to this. Bye!